Welcome to livingpianos.com. I'm Robert Estrin with a really personal story today about every piano I've lived with. Now, truth be known, I started selling pianos out of my home decades ago, so I'm not going to include every single piano I literally lived with, but every single piano that was my practice piano. And there's a lot of them. So let's get started. Let's go way back in time. When I was born, there was a big old Sommer upright in my bedroom. Now, I didn't study piano yet, but my sister, who was a little bit older than me, she did, and she studied with my father. He had his studio right upstairs. This is in a Levitt house, the same house where my father taught Billy Joel and many other people before he moved when I was about 5 years old. So that was my practice piano when we moved, because that's when I started lessons after that point. And it was a good piano, but at the same time, my father in his studios, both in the house in the Levitt section and in the new house that we moved to, he had in his studio a Baldwin L 6'3" grand, as well as a Steinway Model S, a beautiful little baby grand his father had given to him in the 1930s. So I got to play those pianos some as well. Now, eventually, because my sister and I both studied the piano and had a practice, my father bought a Baldwin Hamilton, brand new. I was about 12 years old, and that one went upstairs, and then the Sommer was downstairs. Both my sister and I taught piano also, and we would teach on that in the playroom where that big old Sommer was, and upstairs we had the nicer Hamilton to play. Now, my father taught at Hofstra University, but did a great deal of his teaching right in our home. And he taught like countless hours, but there was a dinner break of an hour from 6 to 7. And after dinner, I'd be done at 6:30. I'd dash downstairs and to play the piano in the studio. So the reason why that was so compelling is that a few years later, my father stepped it up and he bought a brand new Baldwin SF10 semi-concert grand, a 7-foot piano, and that piano was such a joy to play. And at that point, the Steinway baby grand went upstairs. My parents sold the Sommer upright, so now we had the beautiful Steinway to practice on, and the playroom was the Hamilton. So the whole game was upped all around, and I was in heaven, especially those 30 minutes after dinner playing that 7-foot Baldwin. I absolutely loved it. But you know what? Practicing on the Steinway baby grand was not so bad either. Now, eventually I moved to go to school in New York City, Manhattan School of Music, and my father was nice enough to let me take the Steinway baby grand, and I had that in my apartment to practice on. When I moved to Southern Illinois to study with Ruth Slenczynska, he also moved that piano for me into my apartment there, and I got to play on that. Then when I transferred to Indiana University, Bloomington, I took the piano with me. Eventually, I lived with a family in this beautiful house in the country. It was wonderful, nice people, gorgeous house, and they had a nice baby grand. Not as good as a Steinway, but there was no place to put the Steinway, so the Steinway ended up going to my sister in Ohio at that point, and I was practicing on a Schumann baby grand. It was rebuilt, nothing special, but hey, I had a baby grand piano. Well, eventually I moved out of the house, and there I was, and I didn't have a piano. And I didn't have much money. I just graduated, just to the point I was graduating from music conservatory. And I found a big old Gulbranson upright, not unlike the old Sommer upright. Nice piano, good sound. It was still an upright, but it served pretty well. Of course, I needed a grand piano for repetition, trills, not to mention the una corda pedal. And so after we got married, my wife and I took all the money that we got as gifts and put that down on a brand new Baldwin Model M 5'2" baby grand. And it was a struggle to make those payments. At that time, the interest rate was 18%. Can you believe that? So that was a long haul. It took 5 years to pay that thing off. In the meantime, I was building up my teaching, and when people would call me, half the time, I kid you not, the first question I would ask is, do you have a piano? and most people didn't have pianos. And this was before you could go out and for a few $100 you could buy a serviceable digital piano. They didn't exist yet. So what I would do is I bought an old upright, and so if somebody called me for lessons, I'd say, hey, I have a piano, and that way I could get the student. Then I was brave and I bought 2 uprights, and before you knew it, we had, believe it or not, 27 pianos in our home. And you might think we had a huge home. We didn't. But the good news was it was built on a hill, had a walkout basement, had a big picture window where I put my recording studio. And we had a lot of pianos and started being very aggressive with selling pianos because there was such a need for it, because most people didn't grow up with pianos. They wouldn't know how to buy a used piano. So I made it my business to help people get pianos. And it also helped my teaching business and the recording studio, and everything was jamming and going fine. Well, here's what happened, and this is kind of crazy. At a certain point, I got a used Baldwin L. It's like a lot of form to this. It's almost like a rondo form of recapitulations of different pianos. Yeah, so this Baldwin L was a nice piano. I thought, maybe I should put my Baldwin M for sale and the L, because even though the Baldwin M was newer and more refined, the L was bigger. Instead of 5'2" like my Baldwin M, it was 6'3". So I put them both up for sale, thinking whichever one sells, I'll keep the other one. Famous last words. They both sold just like that, and there I was without a piano. Can you believe this? So at that point, I started hunting down an instrument. I found a Kawai baby grand that became my practice instrument. And it was a good little piano. Of course, I still wanted something bigger. And that's when I came across a young woman who was helping her father, who was a retired piano technician, to sell his Steinway grand. It was a model XR, a 6'1" or 6'2" Steinway. And that became my piano. And interestingly, in my recording studio, I had something not dissimilar to this. This is my own invention, by the way, which you'll be hearing more about. But I bought a state-of-the-art Kurzweil K250. This was an amazing piano, and it was a full-fledged synthesizer workstation that not only had all the instruments of the orchestra, it also had a beautiful piano sound with 88 real wooden keys. So that was in my control room. What I did with the Steinway Grand is I outfitted it with MIDI. I became a dealer of this technology and started helping people around the country wanting to be able to interface their acoustic pianos with computers. This is way back in the 80s, so I've been doing this a long time. And so, for example, I could play the Steinway Grand and hear the sounds of the Kurzweil, so I could layer an orchestra with the piano performance, and it was great for the recording studio and all of that. So where are we then? Eventually, living in a small town, Bloomington, Indiana, I loved it, because you get on your bike and in 10 minutes you're in the country, and you find these watering holes and lakes, that you're all by yourself. It was really idyllic, but at the same time, a town of 50,000, making a living as a musician. My wife was traveling 2.5, 3 hours away to play with various orchestras, and it was really tough, even though I had a full-line music store and a piano rebuilding shop and delivery and everything you could imagine, lesson program. It was still tough to make a living. So eventually we moved to Los Angeles. And at that point, I sold my Steinway, and I had a lot of new pianos because we had a whole store. It was called Music House, and that was in Bloomington, and it was a business we ran for quite a number of years. And so I had a 6'1" Wurlitzer, which was actually a Young Chang, a good piano. It was brand new, and that was my piano in California. Well, I found yet another Baldwin L. These keep popping up, huh? And, in the used market, I got a great deal on it. So I sold the Wurlitzer. A church was looking for a piano, and they were very happy. And I was very happy with my Baldwin L. Once again, a 6'3" grand piano in good shape. I had my technician, dialed it in. And I had, that was it. I was fine. Well, my piano technician, who was a master technician, had been a concert technician for years, He owned a Mason & Hamlin Double B, the BB. This piano was his personal piano, and he had babied it and put new hammers and dialed it in, and it was a pre-Aeolian from 1929. And that piano, he wanted to sell it, and he asked if I could help him, so he put it in my studio. As soon as I played that, I wanted it. I just, it's as great as that Baldwin was, to go to that 7-foot range, it was a whole other ball game. So I said, Bob, could you do me a favor? Can you give me a chance so I see if I can sell my Baldwin so I can afford to buy your Mason & Hamlin BB? And I managed to do it. And then I had the ultimate piano. And you think I'd be done. And I was. It was the nicest piano I'd ever played. I loved this thing. Well, it turned out that I had yet another Baldwin L. By the way, I didn't realize how many Baldwin Ls there were, but I had another Baldwin L that I came across that was a nice piano that I put into serviceable condition. It was in my studio along with my other instruments. And I had a concert pianist from San Diego come up. He said he had friends who were looking for a piano and asked him to check this out for them. So he comes in and he plays that piano, and then he sits down on my Mason & Hamlin BB, and I said, well, that's not for sale. He goes, well, I know. And he's playing it and playing it and playing it for a long time, and then he leaves. He comes back a few days later, and once again, he's sitting down at the Mason & Hamlin. I'm going, what is he doing? He says, here's the deal. I've got your Baldwin sold, but I got to have this Mason & Hamlin. And I'm going, well, And so he made me an offer I couldn't refuse, because with the money for the $2,000, I knew I could replace my that Mason & Hamlin, and the only way to go was bigger, because I knew I couldn't. I mean, it was so unlikely I'd find such a great 7-foot piano again. So I went on a hunt for the ultimate concert grand. What a fun job that was, having some money in my pocket, looking for a great piano. Ended up finding a Baldwin SD10 9-foot piano, absolutely out of this world. This piano had sustain, power, clarity, warmth, everything. And my piano technician, by the way, as I mentioned earlier, Bob had been a master technician in the concert market in Dallas for years and tuned countless concert grands servicing for concerts. He said that my piano was among the best 2 or 3 pianos he had ever come across in his life. So I was set. We moved into a big live-work loft with 19-foot ceilings, started a concert series, Art District Concerts, right in our own home. It was awesome. We could fit 80 people comfortably there, and that piano sounded glorious in that room. Well, eventually we moved, and the new living room was a normal-sized living room, and this piano was made for like Carnegie Hall. It had so much volume that I would practice with this piano completely closed with a felt string cover with the music rack on top of the piano. It was just too loud. And so I decided to sell the piano because it was just too big for where I was living. And the good news was I had several people interested, including 2 new concert halls that were hunting down a piano, and they both wanted this piano. Of course, there's committees and all that. And we'd worked it out that I would come and play the dedication concert on my piano to the new venue, whichever one was going to choose it. And as it went through the boards, we were just waiting to see which one was going to get the piano. Wouldn't you know it, it was some Sunday afternoon, an elderly couple comes in from the desert, and the man sits down and plays one piece on my SD10 concert grand and wrote me a check for my asking price, and that was it. The one piece he played, I kid you not. That's who ended up with my concert grand, the greatest piano of all time. So what are you going to do? You know, I'm sure that he enjoys the piano. That's great. And as it turned out, it was right around the same time I ended up inheriting my father's 7-foot SF10. that magnificent piano, which I restored, and that is my personal piano today. So there's a lot of Baldwins in my story, huh? And this SF10 is a glorious instrument, one of the finest pianos I've ever played. Again, a singing, rich tone. And I'm going to play something for you. I'm going to go to my living room now and play you something on that piano so you can see if this whole lineage of pianos, if I ended up with the right one. I think I did. I hope you like it. We'll see you in a little bit. So that's my father's piano. I remember as a teenager when this piano came to our house, how excited we all were and how beautiful the tone was. And it's still producing, after all these years, such gorgeous music. I hope you've enjoyed this personal story about all my pianos. And thanks so much for joining me. Again, I'm Robert Estrin here at livingpianos.com. We'll see you next time.